The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain. Chaplain for today is our very own Reverend Grady St. Dennis, the House chaplain.
As we gather to resume the work entrusted, let us pause in prayer. As we begin this session today, O God, let your timeless and everlasting love live out this day within the possibilities and the impossibilities of our very human lives. We still ourselves in this moment in humble gratitude to you, our loving Maker, Maker of color, sound, texture, quietness, and the restless beauty in living things. We thank you, we bless you. Maker of all that is unseen, of all that has been, of all that words could never capture. God, we the children of your love, the creatures of your kindness, the guardians of your creation, we thank you and bless you. Loving Maker, bless and keep and guard these faithful public servants. Sustain them in the difficult and challenging call to which they have been called. Help each to serve faithfully and to promote the general welfare. Let the sense of unity and cooperation continue to grow among us. Maker and mover of heaven and earth, we thank you for your making, your trusting, your loving, your never-ending goodness. Amen.
Members, again, our chaplain for the day is the Reverend Grady St. Dennis, our very own House chaplain. If you'll please remain standing, join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. Members, at this time, I would like to introduce our newest House member, Representative Susan Allen from District 61B. Will you please join me in giving her a very hearty Minnesota House welcome? Thank you, members, and welcome Representative Allen. The clerk will take the roll.
Please, three.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. Dang it. If there's no further objections, the clerk will read the journal for the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 87th session, 2011. 64th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Monday, May 23rd, 2011.
And now, if there are no further objections, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with and will stand as approved by the chief clerk. Hearing no objections, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Introduction of House Files. The following House Files are offered introduction today. The chief clerk will report these House Files and give them their first reading.
Introduction and first reading of House File 1762 through 1923.
First reading House File 1762 through 1923. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate following Senate file herewith transmitted. Senate File 930, signed Cal R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate.
First reading of Senate Files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 930, an act relating to state government. The bill is being referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
First reading Senate Files. Motions and resolutions. They're a copy of the non-controversial motions in the House desk and online. If there are no objections, we will take action on these motions first. Seeing no objections, the motions prevail. Announcements.
I got other motions.
Oh, I'm sorry. There are other motions at the desk.
Beard moves that House File 1068 be recalled from the Committee on Ways and Means and re-referred to the Committee on Transportation Policy and Finance.
Member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, House File 1068 was the transportation policy bill that was ended up on the floor of the House last year. We just need to recall it to transportation and do some more work to make a good bill even better. I just appreciate your support.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion, the motion prevails.
Beard moves that House File 1588 be recalled from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration and re-referred to the Committee on Transportation Policy and Finance.
Member from Scott, Representative Beard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a provision, a MnDOT housekeeping bill that didn't make it through deadlines last year. It's in the Rules Committee. We'd like to bring it back to committee and start it on its way. It has to do with rebuilding 35E through St. Paul. Thank you for your support.
Discussion to the motion. Seeing no further discussion, the motion prevails.
Doubt moves that House File 1766 be recalled from the Committee on Health and Human Services Reform and re-referred to the Committee on Commerce and Regulatory Reform.
The member from Itasca, Representative Doubt, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This basically is just moving it from Health and Human Services Reform to Commerce. I've spoken with both chairs. They are in favor of that re-referral, so I'd ask you to vote in support of it.
Discussion. The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling, to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Dowd would yield for a question, please.
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Representative Dowd, is it your intention that this bill would go back to Health and Human Services Reform after it makes a stop in Commerce?
Member from Itasca, Representative Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling. Yes, that is my intent.
Member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Gottwalt yield, please?
He will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Same question to you, Representative Gottwalt. Would you be expecting to bring this back and hear it in your committee after it goes to Commerce?
Representative Gottwalt.
Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Liebling, yes.
Okay. Thank you,
The
Mr.
member
Speaker.
from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you.
Further discussion to the doubt motion. Seeing no further discussion, the motion prevails.
Fabian moves that House File 1890 be recalled from the Committee on Taxes and re-referred to the Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development Policy and Finance.
Member from Roseau, Representative Fabian, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is a bill that relates to the bovine tuberculosis tax credit that was inadvertently taken away from property owners in northwest Minnesota. It's simply going to the Agriculture Committee first and then on to Committee on Taxes after that. I'd appreciate your support. Thank you.
Discussion to the Fabian motion. Seeing no further discussion, the motion prevails.
Hortman moves that House File 95 be returned to its author.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Ortman, to your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's my bill. I'm asking that it be returned to its author. There was a miscommunication between me and the revisor's office when I had the bill drafted, and as drafted, the bill does not express my intent.
Seeing no further discussion, the motion prevails.
That's it.
Announcements. The member from Anoka, Representative Abler. For what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege, Mr. Speaker.
State your point of personal privilege, Representative Abler.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is worse than I thought. I mostly wanted to say thank you for the kindness that was poured out to me and my family last September regarding my son Josiah's death. I have learned a tremendous amount since then that I didn't think I needed to know. But I tell you this, and I'll mention that in a minute, but I just, the outpouring of kindness and love and whatever terms are nice to describe this body and staff and the community that surrounds this place, the people that work here and those who are hired by interests, and it was overwhelming to me. And the thank you is so hollow, but I'll just say thank you for that. I didn't realize how many people share this kind of pain. They're everywhere. They sit next to you, perhaps. They lost somebody a decade ago or 30 years ago. It wouldn't have to be a son. It could be their mother or brother or cousin or neighbor. In the hallway walking over today, I talked to two people in that category. One was just today. They went to the event, and one was decades ago. And so as people who rub shoulders with tens of thousands of people in their districts, it's good for me to remember that even though the people go on with their lives, it's not the same. And they wear their grief like a T-shirt, visible sometimes, mostly hidden. And so, it's good to actually talk about it, not to be afraid to bring it up. Good old Bill or Josiah or whomever. And it helps. And I just wanted to thank you for that and just express a bit of what I've learned about that. And thank you for all of your kindness.
Announcements. The member from Mille Lacs, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like a point of personal privilege to offer a resolution.
State your point of personal privilege, Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is National School Choice Week, and as we all know, Minnesota has a rich tradition in school choice. Just to bring you up to date historically, it takes us back to our former governor and late Governor Rudy Perpich, who began the post-secondary enrollment option in 1985. That was followed by the second chance options in 1987 and open enrollment in 1988. And finally, in this body, the creation of charter schools led by former Representative Becky Kelso in 1991. That's over 20 years ago. Since that time, the legislature has added concurrent enrollment, college in the schools, earning college credit by passing the college level examination program, which we call CLEP, and a variety of local options that include online learning. Much of the credit of these choices belongs to innovators such as Joe Nathan, Ted Couldry, Joe Graba, John Bolin, and former governors Arnie Carlson and Tim Pawlenty. We thank them and other leaders, including our own Carlos Mariani, Mindy Greiling, Lyndon Carlson, Linda Slocum, and Mark Biskins. Today we can boast of 337 public school districts, including intermediates, magnets, and integration schools, 149 charter schools. We have online, supplemental, and full-time students in 24 different public or charter schools. We have 485 non-public schools, including private and home schools, over 74,000 students enrolled. Mr. Speaker, with that, I'd like to yield to Representative John Benson to read our resolution.
Representative Benson from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to offer to you and to our fellow members a House resolution commemorating Minnesota's School Choice Week. Whereas all children in Minnesota should have the right to a highest quality schools possible, and whereas citizens across Minnesota agree that improving the quality of education in Minnesota and expanding access to higher effective schools should be an issue of importance to our state's leaders, Mr. Speaker, I yield to Representative Woodard.
Representative Woodard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas Minnesota recognizes the critical role that an effective and accountable system of education plays in preparing all children in Minnesota to be successful in the global economy, and whereas Minnesota has a multitude of high-quality public schools, public charter schools, and non-public schools, and has many high-quality teaching professionals in public, private, and charter schools who are committed to educating children, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield to Representative Slocum.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Slocum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas the vital cause of education reform is one that transcends ideology and political party affiliation. Whereas research in Minnesota and across our nation demonstrates conclusively that providing children with multiple schooling options improves academic performance. Now therefore, be it resolved by the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration of the House of Representatives of the State of Minnesota that it recognizes January 22nd through 28th, 2012 as Minnesota School Choice Week and calls this observance to the attention of all of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Slocum. Announcements. Representative Kiffmeyer. Announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just an announcement that the Health and Human Services Finance Committee will be meeting today at 1 o'clock. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Announcements. The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I would just like to alert members to an exhibit that is now through Tuesday in the Great Hall. Urge you to visit it. It's the exhibit Why Treaties Matter, which is presented under the auspices of the Minnesota Humanities Center and the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Just briefly, over 300 treaties were made between the United States government and Native American people since our nation was established, and this includes several treaties in the state of Minnesota. These treaties still matter today. This exhibit is a fine example of how they matter and how they are still important.
Member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, members, the Education Finance Committee will be meeting at 12:52 p.m. Please be prompt. If you're late, it will be noted on your permanent record.
The member from Carver, Representative Hoppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, specifically members of the Commerce Committee, we are meeting this afternoon. We are not going to meet at 2:30. We are going to meet at 2:45. Other than that, everything is the same, but we are moving the meeting back to 2:45 this afternoon. Thank you.
Announcements. Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege, Representative Westrom.
Mr. Speaker, members, I know we try to be judicious in introducing who we introduce on the floor, but 6 years ago today was a very exciting day for us, but a day that our twin daughters came unexpectedly with an emergency delivery. After my wife had been airlifted to Abbott and with Representative Abler, I know what you mean when this body pours out during times of concern. But members, I would just like to introduce our daughters, Madeline and Whitney, and they happen to be celebrating their 6th birthday today, and they're up front, and I just would like to introduce them and let members know that, and just the fact that they were having a birthday today and I realize I've committed to the chamber event after I realized it was now their birthday, or before I realized it was their birthday, and so I just thought we could make a special day for them here on the House floor the first day of session 2012.
Any other announcements? The member from Stearns, Representative Gottwald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members, the Health and Human Services Reform Committee will meet at 2:30 in room 200 of the State Office Building this afternoon.
Announcements. The member from Hennepin, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A point of personal privilege, I guess.
State your point of personal privilege, Representative Thiessen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I just wanted to take just a minute to welcome everybody back from our perspective as well, and to welcome Representative Allen to the House of Representatives. It really is historic that she has joined us as the first Indian woman to be a legislator in the state of Minnesota, and I think it's worth noting that. I also wanted to thank the Speaker and the Majority Leader as we have led up to the session for keeping us informed about kind of what is happening. And I think that that's a good precedent as we move forward here. I also am pleased to hear that everybody is talking about the number one thing that we ought to be focusing on, which is jobs and the economy. We have work to do this session, I think, to restore the confidence of the people of Minnesota in our institution. It's something that we all need to work on. And I think by focusing on jobs and the economy and building a strong middle class, that's what people want us to be focusing on. And if we focus on that, I think we'll achieve that objective, not only of doing good for the people of Minnesota, but getting them back on our side. So I look forward to working with you, working with all of you, and I know our members do too on that. And I hope that we don't get distracted by things that don't do anything to create jobs and move our economy forward. Those divisive things are not what the people of Minnesota want right now. And so we look forward to working with you on those things that are going to bring us together. And I hope that we can avoid some of the divisive issues that led to some of the problems we ran into, including a government shutdown last year. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, for how we've led into the session so far, and I look forward to working with you on jobs and economic issues.
Announcements. The member from Washington, Representative Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3 p.m. Thursday, January 26, 2012.
Representative Dean moves that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3 p.m. Thursday, January 26. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevails. Representative Dean.
Speaker, I move the House do now adjourn.
Representative Dean moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion prevailed. The House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. Thursday, January 26, 2011.